Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading of Chatroom with a View by Glenn Maynard, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me for chapter 1. The wind gusts reached into the woods and sporadically shifted the log cabin at its base, and the raindrops thumped the structure with a little more vigor when they did. It wasn't that it was a threatening storm, but it created enough of a commotion to jolt Troy Cullen back into the world in which he was not a very big fan. The gray, sticky afternoon in late July contained enough heat to bring on this afternoon thunderstorm, but much more accompanied the storm beyond the clouds and the thunder and the rain. Troy looked around the room from the floor of this log structure and with hazy vision saw his father on the hardwood floor across from him. Neither of them moved like the approaching storm. Turning his head to the left, he could see his house through the window. In fact, he could see the window of his bedroom from his current position inside this little cabin in the backyard. He was on the other side looking in not long ago, but a lot had changed since then. In the matter of an hour, his entire world had turned upside down. He looked at his father again, and not a lot of good came from that glance. He certainly appeared different than he did an hour ago. An hour ago, he was full of vim and vigor. An hour ago, he was as wild as he was throughout Troy's entire childhood. An hour ago, he was violent yet again. Now he wasn't any of those things. But then Troy saw him stir. As Troy continued to keep an eye on his father, making sure he did not rise up to do more harm, his mind was flooded with episodes of his past. He was hard-pressed to find a good one. In fact, he was quite certain that there were none. Maybe he was just a hard disciplinarian. Maybe it was just that he too was the product of a bad environment. But his father had never talked about his past. Troy did not belong to the type of family that would sit around the table talking about their day. He was an only child. He was also a lonely child. Sometimes the two go hand in hand, and in his case, solitude was forced upon him due to the circumstances that were created within the confines of a house he could see from his current position. Another crackle of thunder made Troy jump, and he noticed that his father jumped too. However, his father returned to unconsciousness. His injuries were far worse than Troy's, and for the first time in his life, he was able to get the upper hand on his father. It was a terrifying moment, but he was 24 years old now and finally able to protect himself. Troy was still living at home, not because he enjoyed being there or because he could not financially take on the burden of a rent payment, but rather he needed to protect his mother from his father. His mother did not ask him to do it, but she knew why he remained at home, even though it was the last place he wanted to be. Nothing good would come of his remaining at home other than his ability to keep an eye on his mother. The abuse in his home went on as long as Troy could remember. He thought everybody's household was like this. He actually thought it was normal until he noticed that he was the black sheep at his school, and his family was the black sheep in town. When they did venture out together as a family, which was a rare occurrence, people would stare. The older he got, the easier it was to understand what was going on and why. The extent of this alienation extended internally as well. Troy's mother received no support from her family when it came to marrying his father. There was not one willing participant on his mother's side who attended the wedding. They knew what was going on, and they knew her fiance was a bad man. Her family saw the dark eyeshadow that covered up her black eyes. They saw the bruises on her body, although she did her best to conceal them. They sensed the trauma within the walls of that big white house that had been passed down through generations of Cullens. They saw it all. The problem was they could not convince their daughter that she was making a grave mistake. Troy was a young boy when he first comprehended that Daddy was punishing everybody in the house, including his mother, and he knew of no other way. He understood that it was the father's job to put Mommy and the kids in their place if they did not behave well. He also knew that it was father's job to put Mommy and the kids in their place for no reason, so he was always on guard and rarely got a proper night's sleep. He lived with stress that was so overwhelming that it affected him even at an age when he didn't know stress was a thing. He heard slaps and punches in the middle of the night, accompanied by his mother's screams. Then he felt slaps and punches because he was expected to be sleeping through all of the commotion, and he was not. Many nights played out like this, especially if there was a bottle of whiskey involved. Whiskey was the gasoline for his engine that drove him wild. Troy remembered that even when there was not gasoline in the engine, bad things still happened, just not as bad as when there was gasoline. Either way, it was a dangerous place to be. In the middle of the room of the log cabin, there was an overturned, rusty garden shovel. It also served as the weapon of choice. It was the only weapon, in fact. Troy stared hard at the shovel and knew that since he was in better shape than his father, it would very much be in his best interest to get to it first. He garnered up the energy to crawl his way over to the weapon and grab hold of this advantage. He became dizzy as he inched his way 5 feet to the shovel. He could feel a sharp pain in his head, and when he reached up to rub it, he brought his hand down and did not see the blood he expected to see. He looked over at his father and did not see blood on him either. However, there was a streak of blood that ran across the floor of the cabin. As he reached out to grab the shovel, his father quickly opened his eyes and lurched forward in an attempt to grab the weapon first. It was kill or be killed, so Troy quickly grabbed the shovel and swung it around, and with an adrenaline-filled rage, hammered his father's head once more. He made sure there was not a doubt about who would persevere in the end. There was still no blood because the edge of the shovel never came in contact with him, but the damage was done this time. It was just like his father to play dead then pounce. Nothing that he did was fair. However, the only thing he learned from his father was how to fight. Take that, you son of a bitch, Troy vented. You're not the tough guy now, Maurice. Looking down at his father's face, Troy noticed that he had been knocked out cold and didn't have to worry about what to do next, at least for the time being. There was still no blood, and that made Troy wonder if his father even had any. Just looking at the face of this son of a bitch flooded him with bad memories that he tried to repress. For the first time he could remember, he did not fear this man any longer. He scoffed, not going to be knocking around people around anytime soon, now are you, Dad? His father was currently no threat to him, and for the first time in a long time, he was able to get a good look at him. He was not aging well for a man who just turned 50 years old. He looked a couple decades older because of the hard life he lived and the anger that he carried around with him. He looked even scruffier than Troy remembered, with the scowl on his crusty face. His hair was mostly gray with a hint of darkness that mixed into his beard, mustache, and eyebrows. The areas of his face not bearded were tinted with 5 o'clock shadow. He was fairly small in stature, perhaps an inch or two past 5'10" or 5 feet. And his red and black checkered flannel shirt rolled up to his elbows displayed only half of his faded snake tattoos slithering up the length of his arms. Troy reached down and grabbed his father's wrist to check for a pulse. He was terrified by what had happened and thought perhaps there was a chance he could be locked up for a long time, even though he had acted in self-defense. It would be his word against his father's, so Troy would not involve the police. There was a pulse, so at least for the time being, he couldn't be charged with his father's death. It would have been worth it, but he could not do it. At his weakest and most vulnerable point, his foot lay across his father's neck, but he could not get himself to step on the gas. After pulling his foot back from his father's throat, he glanced over at his mother lying lifeless in the corner. Her bleeding head was propped up by the 2 walls elevated just inches above the floor. He averted this grotesque view, looked back at his father, and returned his foot to his father's throat, but still could not get himself to follow through. Troy felt responsible because he was unable to save his mother from this savage beast. Nothing would ever be the same. He was living there for the sole reason of keeping his mother alive, but he couldn't be there for her this time. Son of a bitch, he yelled out. Son of a bitch. The reality of the situation was beginning to hit him hard. He looked over at his mother and quickly turned away. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, what have you done? It was too gruesome of a scene for his mind to process. He backed away from her body until his back hit a wall and he just slid down to the floor, landing hard on his butt. Ah, he cried out as he covered his face with his hands and began to sob. He didn't need to check his mother's pulse. She had already bled out and the puddle was a streaming tributary that slowly reached the middle of the room. Nobody ever said life was fair, his mother used to say to him. He realized now that it was perhaps her way of rationalizing the hand she'd been dealt. She came from a religious family and grew up going to church, but his father changed all that. Praying is for manises, his father used to say through his chiseled jaw. There ain't nobody gonna change nothing. You're fooling yourself if you think anybody up there's listening. After hearing this preacher enough times, it was easier for his mother to just go along with it. However, Troy wanted to defy his father in any way he could and actually attended mass every now and then once he got his driver's license and could have a little independence. He would slip into the back of the church late and leave early just so nobody would notice him. Having decided to keep his father alive for the time being was forced upon him, and now he was faced with horrific options. Sure, he could call the police and tell them everything, how his father killed his mother and how he nearly killed his father. However, if Troy followed through with that plan, he would most likely go to prison for a very long time. He tried to think of alternatives, but his head was still feeling woozy off and on, and he was having difficulty thinking. It finally occurred to him that if he was going to help himself to a life out of prison, then he would have to contain his father and do something with his mother's body. He could not believe that his mind was actually contemplating such thoughts, but he needed to bury the body of his mother outside in order to avoid doing time. There was nothing more that he could do to protect her, so he had to protect himself. Now all that was left was to act. The hard part was breaking the seal on this plan. He knew that putting this plan in motion meant restraining his father, should he awaken and regain his full strength. Then he needed to dig a hole deep enough so that animals would not discover this terrible idea of his. It was a terrible idea, but Troy's hand was forced. He rationalized in his mind that his mother was dead anyway, and nothing was going to bring her back, not even prayers. If he could keep his father contained in the house, then his father could live his life until he died of natural causes, and he would never again be a threat to him. He could do this and have a clear conscience that he did not murder his father. He knew his mind was not right at this particular time, but he was well aware that there was absolutely no way around it. Besides, his father always stressed to him that anyone who kills their parent will go to prison forever and they will throw away the key. His father said this as if he knew the moment would eventually come, and so many years later his script worked and actually saved his life.